Nigel Farage locked horns with fellow MEP Richard Corbett after the Labour politicians accused the Brexiteer of changing the topic of their discussion to avoid discussing the potential consequences of Brexit. Nigel Farage immediately shut down the Labour MEP, renewing his commitment to a Brexit no deal and gaining British independence from the old men in Brussels. The pair exchanged barbs as they debated whether Prime Minister Boris Johnson using terms as betrayal and surrender bill in relation to actions taken by opposition parties is inflaming spirits across the UK, as Mr Corbett accused the Brexit party leader of changing the subject to avoid talks on the impact of no-deal Brexit. Mr Farage said, "Richard, I want a no-deal Brexit. I don't want to be governed by a bunch of old men in Brussels. I want to save £39 billion. We are discussing that. I'm happy to sit and discuss no-deal Brexit with you for 2 hours on a Sunday morning, and that's fine." After reading scathing comments Labour Party members aimed at Brexiteers and Conservatives during the negotiations, Mr Farage continued, "Far worse language has been used by the members of the Labour Party, including the front bench against the Prime Minister, than he used back against them. It strikes me as being a bit rich when Jess Phillips said publicly, 'I will knife Corbyn in the front, not the back.'" Mr Corbett conceded both sides of the argument should cease using inflammatory language, but he rose to the defense of his Birmingham Yardley colleague, suggesting Ms Phillips' claims about the Prime Minister's language is designed to cause hatred as part of a strategy. Mr Corbett said, "I will agree that politicians have used bad language and language they shouldn't have used and should withdraw, apologize for and all that. I'm just saying, within the House of Commons, which has very strict and high standards, it is not part of our political tradition to use inflammatory language. The use of that language by the Prime Minister, no less. That is qualitatively something different." The Yorkshire and the Humber MEP continued, "Not only is she making a fair point, but I think it's a deliberate strategy by the Prime Minister, because here we all are now talking about whether it's appropriate to describe people in that way, rather than looking at what the bill actually does. And far from being a surrender bill, it's actually a protection of Britain bill. Because a no-deal Brexit from the European Union would be catastrophic for Britain, and that is what the Prime Minister wants to avoid discussion on. The actual practical consequences of a no-deal Brexit." The Prime Minister was embroiled in a bitter debate with MPs on Wednesday after several parliamentarians lamented the use of the term surrender bill to describe new legislation Parliament passed in early September to prevent a no-deal Brexit. The Benn Act was rushed through the Commons ahead of the prorogation of both houses, imposing on Mr Johnson the obligation to request an extension to the Brexit deadline if no deal is agreed with the European Union at the next EU summit on the 17th of October. MPs were kept from returning to Westminster for 2 weeks before the Supreme Court on Tuesday ruled the Prime Minister acted unlawfully when he shut down Parliament, after anger from Labour MPs over Mr Johnson's repeated use of Surrender Act to describe the Benn bill. The Prime Minister sparked more fury on the benches by replying with the word humbug. The Conservative leader also demanded apologies when his actions were criticised in a tense resumption of Parliament this evening. Mr Johnson also mocked Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn's demand for a general election for the third time over the weekend. He can't control his party. He can't decide whether he's for leave or remain. He's being held captive by his colleagues. The electorate are being held captive by this zombie parliament and this zombie opposition, and he wants the entire country to be held captive in the EU after the 31st of October as a cost of nearly £1 billion a month.